When my mom died, my roommate said, "Don't expect me to pay your share this month. Sympathy doesn't pay bills." I had just returned from the funeral. "Honestly, you should have planned better." She slammed her door. But when my mom's retirement account transferred to me and I bought the condo, her face dropped. She had 30 days to find a new place. I, 35 female, just got back from my mother's funeral when my roommate, 38 female, looked at me and said, "Don't expect me to pay your share this month. Sympathy doesn't pay bills." I was still holding my mom's ashes. She followed it up with, "Honestly, you should have planned better," and slammed her door. 2 weeks later, I used my mom's retirement account to buy the condo from the owner. When I handed my roommate her 30-day notice, her jaw dropped. I live in Sacramento, California. I've been here about 10 years, moved here originally to be closer to my mom as her health started declining. We weren't rich. I worked at the public library downtown, and my mom, Helena, lived in a senior apartment community down in Elk Grove. She'd been living with MS for nearly 15 years. It wasn't easy. Because Sacramento isn't exactly cheap, I had to get a roommate to afford the place I was in, a 2-bedroom condo in Midtown. My roommate, Maris, wasn't someone I knew well. We were introduced through a friend of a friend about 2 years before all of this happened. She was a legal assistant, very organized, punctual with rent, and kind of cold. We weren't friends, more like polite strangers who shared a kitchen. I didn't mind that. I wasn't looking for companionship. I just needed someone dependable. During those 2 years, things were mostly stable. Maris kept to herself. I spent most of my free time caring for my mom, picking up prescriptions, scheduling appointments, helping coordinate with her home nurse. It was exhausting, but I felt responsible. She raised me alone after my dad died in a boating accident when I was 12. She was all I had. In early February, my mom took a sharp turn. Her condition deteriorated over a couple of weeks. She became barely responsive. I was using all my PTO and eventually took a few unpaid days just to be there. I stayed the night at her place more than once, eating vending machine food and sleeping in the recliner by her bed. She passed away on a Thursday morning. Quietly, peacefully, I was there holding her hand. The nurse who was with us placed a hand on my shoulder when I cried. She said, "She waited for you, that's love." I'll never forget that. The next few days were a blur. Arranging a small memorial, dealing with paperwork, notifying distant relatives. The funeral was held on Monday. Just a small gathering of people she'd known from her church, some neighbors, and a few of my friends. It wasn't glamorous, but it was exactly how she would have wanted it. Quiet, simple, dignified. When I got home that evening, I was drained. I parked in our spot, carried the urn, some documents, and her wedding ring up to the condo. My face was swollen from crying. I hadn't eaten in 12 hours. As I stepped inside, Maris looked up from her laptop and paused whatever show she was watching. Her eyes flicked to the small box in my hands, then to my face. "Just so you know," she said, "don't expect me to cover your half this month. Sympathy doesn't pay bills." I didn't speak. I didn't know how to respond. I stared at her, blinking slowly. She went on, her voice matter-of-fact, like she was giving me budgeting advice. "Honestly, you should have planned better. Everyone's got family stuff." Then she stood, walked to her room, and slammed the door. I was left standing in the living room, holding my mother's remains. There are moments in life that change something in you, permanently. That was one of them. That night I didn't eat. I didn't cry. I just sat on the couch, my mother's ashes on the coffee table, and tried to wrap my mind around how someone could be so fundamentally cold. Not even angry, just indifferent. Like grief was a transaction she didn't want to be involved in. For the next week, I went silent. I didn't engage with her. I went back to work and handled things quietly. She seemed relieved by that, probably assuming I'd just move on and be her quiet, unbothered roommate again. But something had shifted. What she didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone, is that my mother had left me her retirement savings. It wasn't a fortune, but it was solid. Around $400,000 that had taken years of careful saving. She didn't live large, but she planned. She used to tell me, "I can't give you everything, but I'll give you a starting point." After the probate was cleared, that money was mine. Now here's the part I didn't expect. I felt guilty at first. Guilty for having access to that kind of financial security while still walking around in a haze of grief. It felt like blood money. But my mom wouldn't have wanted me to live small or afraid. She would have told me, use it. Make your life easier. So I did. I remembered that our condo was being rented out by a woman named Mrs. Wu, a retired accountant who lived in San Jose. She owned the unit through her family trust. I had her contact info from previous maintenance issues. One afternoon, I called her. I asked if she'd ever consider selling the unit. She said she might. Her kids weren't interested in keeping it in the family, and the upkeep was becoming a hassle. She didn't want to go through a big sale process, though. I made her a cash offer. She talked to her children. Then she accepted. We signed the paperwork within 2 weeks. I didn't tell Maurice anything. She went on living her usual life, meal prepping on Sundays, watching true crime shows late into the night, making iced coffee that always dripped onto the counter. She had no idea. The Friday after I signed the final closing documents, I printed out a letter. Nothing dramatic, just a simple 30-day notice to vacate. I waited until she got home from work. She came in, heels clicking, coat folded over one arm, scrolling her phone. I handed her the envelope. "What's this?" she asked. I told her, "You have 30 days to move. I bought the condo." The silence that followed was everything. She opened the letter, scanned it quickly, then looked up with wide eyes. "You bought the condo?" "Yes. Why? I didn't want to rent anymore." "You're kicking me out?" "No, I'm just not renewing your lease. Like you said, people should plan better." She didn't say anything. She just stared at me. I could see it sinking in. The realization that the power dynamic had completely flipped. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I just gave her the same coldness she gave me, with legal authority backing it. She protested, of course. She said it was unfair, that 30 days wasn't enough time. She reminded me of how stable she'd been as a roommate. But I didn't budge. Maurice moved out on day 28. Didn't say goodbye. Left behind a half-used bottle of coconut oil in the bathroom and a fridge magnet shaped like a cat's butt. Once she was gone, I deep-cleaned the place top to bottom. I painted the walls. I replaced the carpets in her room. I made the space mine in every possible way. And in her old bedroom, I set up a quiet reading nook just for me. I don't sit there to feel victorious. I sit there to feel at peace. It's my way of honoring my mom. Over the weeks that followed, I started noticing all the small ways Maurice had left her imprint on the place, things I had ignored or tolerated before but now saw for what they were. The shallow sighs when I used the washer too late. The passive-aggressive notes when I left dishes to soak. Her domination of the thermostat, always just a bit too cold for comfort. I'd let all those things slide because she paid on time and didn't bring home drama. Funny how your tolerance erodes once the scales fall from your eyes. With her gone, the condo was so quiet I could finally hear myself think. And grieve. Really grieve. Not the rushed, numb kind you perform for coworkers or funeral attendees. But the ugly, private grief that hits at night when you see your mother's favorite mug in the back of the cabinet or find a voicemail from her you forgot to delete. There were days I didn't get dressed. Days I sat by the window, clutching her ring and letting the guilt of relief wash over me. Because despite the sadness, there was relief too. Relief that she wasn't suffering, that I wasn't constantly afraid of a 2 a.m. call from her nurse or a panicked trip to the ER. And yet, there was loneliness. My mom had been the last real connection in my life. I wasn't married. No siblings. Friends had drifted over the years, replaced by acquaintances and coworkers with busy lives and full calendars. Now, it was just me in a freshly cleaned condo, with no one expecting anything from me. Well, except for the retirement account paperwork and a barrage of calls from financial advisors trying to convince me to grow my inheritance. I ignored most of them. Instead, I poured myself into slow, grounding rituals. I organized the pantry. I decluttered every drawer. I bought a second-hand record player and started collecting my mom's favorite old jazz albums from flea markets. I began baking again, something I hadn't done since my 20s. The first thing I made was her lemon tea loaf. The scent of it in the kitchen brought me to tears. There were nights I caught myself about to tell someone, "My roommate used to put that spatula in the wrong drawer," only to remember Maurice was gone. Not just physically, but erased from my life in every meaningful way. I had no desire to fill her room. Not yet. Everyone kept asking, "Are you going to get another roommate? Rent it out." But the idea of inviting a stranger into that space again made my skin crawl. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to split costs. I didn't have to share anything. That freedom was new, and it tasted like something sacred. Still, I kept the door to her old room closed for a while. It was like a scar I wasn't ready to look at. That changed the day I found a handwritten card wedged behind the fuse box when I was changing an air filter. It was from my mom, dated 4 months before she died. I recognized her handwriting immediately, strong, loopy, and a little inconsistent from the hand tremors. The card read, "Anya, you're doing more than enough. I see you. I'm proud of you. I know I'll be gone before you're ready for it, but that's the deal we get in life. You were the best thing I ever made. Love you always, Mom." I sat on the floor, card in hand, sobbing like I hadn't let myself in months. That message, found accidentally, was the push I needed. I opened the room. I donated everything Mari's left behind: cheap framed prints, a broken diffuser, some hangers. I replaced the curtains, painted the walls a soft sage green. I brought in a deep, comfortable chair and a bookshelf. One corner of the room became a small altar for my mother. Her urn, her wedding ring, a picture of us at Yosemite when I was 10, and a small candle I lit every morning before work. The room became my sanctuary. It didn't erase the bitterness I still carried, not just about Mari's, but about how cruel the world can feel when you're grieving and broke and lonely. But it gave me space to redirect it. Sometimes I replay what happened in my head, wondering if I overreacted. I know people will say it was petty or vindictive, that kicking someone out over a single callous comment is overkill. But the truth is, it wasn't about the comment. It was about everything that came with it. The disregard, the entitlement, the refusal to even pretend to care that my life had just split open. I wasn't expecting a therapist, just a little humanity. In the days after she left, I found more signs that her compassion had always been surface level. Receipts showing she'd been looking at apartments even before my mom passed, likely because she thought I wouldn't be able to pay rent on my own. Texts on our shared tablet from her friend talking about Anya's meltdown phase and how she'd bail soon anyway. So no, I didn't overreact. I responded, decisively. And honestly, it felt good, not joyful, not triumphant, but solid, like I'd taken my life back an inch at a time. There's more to the aftermath, though. Things I didn't expect. People I hadn't spoken to in years started reaching out once they heard about my mom. Some wanted to reconnect. Some just wanted closure. Others, one in particular, offered something more. After Mari's was gone and I had the place to myself, life began to settle into a new kind of stillness. Not empty, just quieter, calmer. I went back to work full-time at the library. I took on more community programs, story hours, digital literacy workshops, even a mystery book club for retirees on Thursday mornings that became my favorite thing in the world. But even as things smoothed out, there was a part of me that remained stuck on that one moment. That cold sentence from Mari's, delivered like a billing notice. Sympathy doesn't pay bills. It kept echoing, not because I was still hurt, but because I wanted to understand how people get that way. And maybe, a little, because I didn't want her to think she'd gotten away with it. About a month after she left, I ran into Rosa, a mutual acquaintance of ours. Rosa had introduced us originally. She worked with Mari's years ago and thought she'd make a low-drama roommate. She looked a little sheepish when we crossed paths at Temple Coffee downtown. She asked, cautiously, "So, I heard Mari's moved out?" I smiled. "Yeah, I bought the condo." Her eyebrows shot up. "Wait, you own it now?" "MHM." She gave a soft whistle. "Good for you." And then, with a hesitant tone, she added, "I probably shouldn't say this, but she's been telling people you kicked her out because you were emotionally unstable. That you were grieving irrationally and lashing out." I took a sip of my coffee, let it sit on my tongue before I responded. "Did she mention the part where she told me sympathy doesn't pay bills?" Rosa blinked. "No. She left that part out." Of course she had. But that moment planted a seed. I wasn't interested in public drama. But I also didn't want people believing some sanitized version of events that painted her as a victim of my grief spiral. So I got a little creative. I didn't tell people anything directly, but I started saying yes when people asked if they could use my story in workshops or articles. A friend who worked in nonprofit housing asked me to do a Zoom panel about inherited property and roommate conflicts. I shared everything without naming Mari's, just the facts. Roommate, cold behavior, unexpected inheritance. Bought a condo, gave 30-day notice. Peace ensued. The story resonated. One of my coworkers in circulation, a soft-spoken guy named Miles, sent me a link one day. It was to a Medium article someone had written, summarizing my experience after attending that panel. The piece went mildly viral in local circles. When grief meets rent, the cold realities of living with strangers. I read the comments section. Dozens of people shared their own stories of insensitive roommates, grief dismissed as inconvenience, and moments they'd stayed silent out of fear of seeming too emotional. People were angry, for themselves. That article was shared widely. Even ended up linked in a local renters group where I occasionally posted book recommendations. Then, one evening, I got a text from an unknown number. "So you're making yourself out to be a martyr now?" It was Mari's. I stared at the message for a while, then I deleted it. I blocked the number. I didn't need to defend myself. The story was already out there. The truth, in its quiet clarity, had done what it needed to do. And I had better things to spend my energy on. Like, for example, Jude. Jude was a city planner I met at a book discussion event hosted at the library. He had soft eyes, the kind of laugh that made everyone in the room relax, and a habit of reading the acknowledgments at the end of every novel, just because he liked seeing gratitude in print. We talked casually at first, swapped recommendations, then coffee, then long walks through the Capitol Park Rose Garden. He wasn't trying to fix me. He wasn't drawn to brokenness, like one guy I'd briefly dated in my late 20s. He just listened. And when I told him the story, not the dramatic version, just the clean, simple facts, he didn't blink. Instead, he asked, "And how do you feel about it now?" I thought about that for a long moment. "Proud," I said. Not for kicking her out, but for not letting myself shrink to accommodate her cruelty. He nodded. "That's real power." It was, and I didn't need to swing it like a sword. It was enough to live well, quietly, on my terms. Mari's tried, later, to spin her own version of events to mutual acquaintances. But it didn't stick. People had seen enough of the broader picture. She moved in with another roommate in Carmichael, and according to someone who still followed her socials, that didn't last long either. Eventually, she faded out of my orbit completely. The best part? I never had to fight, never had to stoop. I just let her show everyone who she really was and let the truth do its work. Now, my home is mine in every sense. The walls don't hold secrets or tension. Just the scent of fresh lemon loaf, the sound of Miles Davis on vinyl, and the occasional laugh when Jude drops by after work and tries, badly, to cook dinner. There's a picture of my mom on the mantle, her arms around me when I graduated college, both of us squinting into the sun. I look at it sometimes and think, you gave me everything I needed. And I used it. I used it to grow. That, to me, is the sweetest revenge of all.